do my best.
I just started our recording.
Yes. So let's give Bridget just another minute.
Sure. Bridget is now here.
Morning, Bridget.
Morning, Bridget.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Happy Saturday. It is noon here. I've been up for about 7 hours. The sun comes up early on these kids and they are out of the tent, sleeping bags in tent. So it's fun here. But like I was telling the group, there's quite a bit of background noise in this Starbucks, so I will stay muted. But we will call this meeting to order. All board members are present. And thank you, Carly, for also joining us, knowing that soon you will too be a board member. At least that's what we believe. And I will turn it over to Flip and Amy, and I will go mute.
Flip your mode.
Thank you, everybody, again for being here. And hopefully everyone was able to receive the prep information that we sent out. The worksheet that Amy had put together and the results from the board self-assessment survey. So as I said, there was a lot. I really appreciate the work and effort that Amy, Eileen, and Matthew have put together. There's a lot there to unpack. We had one plan, we got some information, we shifted to some others, thinking about the time constraints. So however, whatever happens today will also, I think after this, kind of debrief and figure out the steps in the future when we can do additional things. But this is, again, not the only day or the last day that we'll be working on this. We'll have this is just continuing to build on the foundation that we have. So I appreciate all of you putting in the effort and having the interest in doing this. I think it's important. It exemplifies being part of a learning organization. So thank you all for doing that. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Amy, and then we'll continue to see if Eileen or Matthew end up showing up. I'll keep watching the attendees list, and then I'll promote them if I see them.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Flip. And I'm going to go ahead and share my presentation to get that going and get kind of my little computer setup going. But yeah, again, this is going to sound kind of redundant to what Flip just said. I just wanted to thank you all for being here. I mentioned in my email yesterday, as a board, you all invest a lot of time in your professional development, which is not only admirable, it's actually proven to improve outcome for kids. And you've been doing a lot of work. So my goal today, that's why we've been coordinating quite a bit. I don't want to, I clicked that by accident. We've been coordinating kind of a bit, Eileen and Matthew and I, right? It's because we want this, all this learning that you have taken on, we want it to be coherent for you. But sometimes, you know, when you go in for a physical, right? Sometimes you need to check cholesterol levels, right? Sometimes, oh, I might have something going on. Maybe this is going to totally age me, a little arthritis. So even if you're working on different things, it keeps the whole body healthy, right? And so the idea is there's different aspects of your work as school board members. And the idea is to focus on the different aspects sometimes at one time, but with the idea, it's going to come together to keep the whole body healthy. So today we're going to be working on one aspect, specifically what's maybe awkwardly titled as boardsmanship, the actual skills that are involved in being a school board that positively affects student outcomes, but that very much is correlated with all the equity work that you've been doing. So it might seem like it's off to the side, but really we're going to weave it together, especially at the end. And I don't want to do this necessarily in a vacuum. So as we're having conversations, we want all the studying and work you've been doing to inform the rest. So if there's any aspects from other work you've been doing that could, absolutely come into our conversation, let's do that. Okay, I want to encourage you to do that, absolutely. But to start us off, so I had this moment where I'm digging through my files with working with you before, and I put in this photo. I'm like, oh my gosh, I really hope this is a graduation photo from Tukwila, because I've had it in my computer for a while. I panicked a little bit, but I wanted to start with the students. So, we're going to do this is a really simple, just kind of, let's turn off the Saturday chore to-do list and everything. Let's just maybe ground ourselves mentally here. I want to do what's called a round robin, where we just go around, and because of Zoom land, I'm going to be calling on you, since we're not around a table and it's kind of, we don't have the physical clues about who goes next. But before we do that, just a little reminder, when we're doing virtual workshops, it can be a little more visually and lower back training to be sitting here in front of a computer so long. If you need to stand up and walk around your room, if you need to run off, get a drink of water, please take care of what you need to do. Not a problem. And also, again, because we're not physically together, I will be kind of calling on people because, again, we don't have the physical clues about who goes next. And also, it's a little harder to read body language. So if I call on you and you haven't finished collecting your thoughts, if you'd like to pass, you're not quite ready yet, please do. I just do that in order to ensure equitable participation by everyone, because again, without the body language clues that you get in person, sometimes it's a little tricky. So this is where we're going to start, though. We're going to think about the kids and think about this picture. And I'm going to start with Dave, but I want people to think about this picture and think of one word, and just say what this picture makes you think of in one word. And I'm going to start with you, Dave. And you can pass.
Well, I see a lot of joy.
Oh, perfect. Edna, what about you? What do you think of?
Inspiring.
Nice. Bridget.
Dedication.
Nice. Flip.
Future.
Future. Oh, Jan.
Pride.
Oh, I like it. Okay, let's do it one more time. Dave, what do you have?
Did you get Bridget?
We did get Bridget. Do you want to repeat it, Bridget?
It was dedication.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Prepared.
Oh, nice. Edna.
Powerful.
Bridget, do you have another one?
Families.
Oh, nice. And Flip, do you have another one?
I'm going to say relief.
Probably for the families too, to build off of Bridget's. And Jan?
Purple.
Purple, a lot of purple. So I'm guessing I did get this photo right. It's a good thing I trust my files. So thanks so much. That was really fun. So let's keep this going here a little bit. And I'm just watching chat here. Oh, that was just a comment from Carly. Excellent. Just in case Eileen and Matthew show up. But so this is where we're going today. So we're going to start. And again, before we start our conversation and dive into the results of the board self-assessment, I'm going to remind us, I think you all might have heard this before, but it's just the best way to prepare for a conversation. Go into why it's important to do the board self-assessments. Luckily, Tukwila has a long history with this, and it's really helpful. And then we'll go into the board self-assessment results and unpack them, and then use them in order to talk about growth goals, which is, to also get to the point where we can maybe start weaving in some of the equity work, to have a well-rounded look at the work you all are doing. And that's going to lead into the synthesizing. Okay, so that's what we have to dedicate these 3 hours from. But I want to hear from you in terms of if there's any other objectives that you have today. Again, you all have been doing a lot of work, and yet you still, boards have like other responsibilities in lives. We want to optimize this time for you. So if there's any other objectives that someone would like to share today? I'm going to take some notes and we'll see if we can't make sure we weave those in as well. And this is, I'm not going to call on you for this one. Does anyone have any other objectives they'd like to share? And they can be global or really universal, really specific. Maybe there's something you'd like to learn about more or a topic to talk about, or perhaps it'll come up as we're chatting. I just like to double check before we start. All right. Y'all are just ready to work, aren't you? Okay, so let's go ahead and dive in then. So there's a lot of foundation behind the board self-assessment. So how they evolved into being where they are now is, for a long time, education has been studied. And obviously, because people want to do their best by educating our children. And for a long time, the primary focus of that research was the proximal factors, the approximate closest factors to a student, which would be the student themselves, the parent, principal of the school. There's been a ton of research on those factors in a student's education that are really close to the student themselves. The distal or distant factors from the student, the superintendent, school board, and general community input, for a long time was basically ignored. And so the late 90s, people kind of woke up to this and started studying, and started, as you should, with a scientific method, going, okay, what does a school board have impact? A lot of people thought perhaps a school board didn't have any impact at all. So is there a correlation between not only what a school board does and how they do it? They wanted to study this. And so in the late 1990s, Iowa actually kicked this off first. And they did start to prove that high performing districts are only defined as districts that have student outcomes that exceed the average, right? And they do take other considerations into effect. So the idea is sometimes they're called outlier districts. If you have districts that outperform the statistical average for the life circumstances that a student finds themselves in that community. But they did find that boards of high performing districts do behave different than boards of low performing districts. And that the actions, not only do they behave different, but the actions they take actually make a difference as well, and some specific differences. So I'd like us to look at this for a second and see, I am going to call on you a little bit. I want to make sure we're having the opportunity to talk about this. And I'm going to monitor my chat box because Jan is commenting about in the chat, and I want to make sure we give her equitable opportunities to participate. But I'm going to start this time with Edna. So is there any phrase or any words that pop out to you with this, Edna, in terms of anything that really resonates with you, maybe something that surprises you when you look at this statement?
I don't think it comes as surprising. I think that I've come to realize that we need to create a healthier environment for what we do, and getting our community more involved and making sure that our staff and students have adequate input.
Okay, and what phrase that, and that's beautiful, and which part of the statement brought that to mind for you?
Create environments where social injustices are overcome and conditions are created.
All right, wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And Bridget, does anything pop out to you?
Yeah, factors within their control. So they're being us.
There is you. Very true. And so why about factors within your control? What about that popped out to you?
Because I've been part of leadership groups that have done extraordinary work along the lines of, improving systemic barriers and challenges. And I know what it looks like. I know what it feels like. I know that that we have the ability to get there and do it. It takes a lot of hard work, and it can be very painful at times. And so that's the piece that we can control. Is I just know that I everything I do, every choice I make, me just showing up even makes a difference, because of who I am too. So it's just like I have factors within my control that I try to do, and I've seen it done before too.
That's an incredibly optimistic statement. So thank you, Bridget. That's wonderful. Sometimes actually I've seen people be afraid of that phrase, that the idea that some people take as meaning they don't have very much in their control. But actually you are giving a very optimistic statement that actually there is a lot within your control, and you feel confident you can make a difference. That's wonderful. So thank you. What about Flip, from your point of view as superintendent, is there anything about this statement that pops out for you?
Yeah, I think much like has been said. I mean, the different roles as you had on the previous slide, you know, everybody plays a part within this kind of system. So addressing factors within their control, I think that's that's true within whatever level within the organization you are. If you're a teacher in the classroom, if you're a principal in the building, and you know, my goal is working with the board and principals and staff is just to create a system that is healthy and supportive beyond just one person. So it's about, that's to me, the sustainability of getting all these pieces in place, so that, you know, elections happen for board members and sometimes those change. Principals change, teachers change, superintendents change, all of those things change. But if you have a really good organization, then it's totally independent. It's not dependent just on one person.
Oh, that's wonderful. And actually, I don't know if that's obvious to a lot of people, the sustainability importance. And sometimes it feels to do this work, you feels like you're walking in quicksand and you're not making any progress, but you're actually walking in concrete. You're laying a foundation. Not the most elegant metaphor, but you know what I mean? Like, it's hard for a reason because you're laying a foundation. So that's really important. Thank you for sharing that. And Jan, if you'd like to type and I can read it for you, or if you're happy to share out loud also. Oh, Jan loves creating environments. That's awesome. That is awesome. Building off of what Edna was starting to talk about. And Dave, what about you?
Yeah, I think probably along the lines of what Flip was saying, but in order to get the, you know, the best results for students is that all pieces of the organization have to be working together in an alignment. And so every groups matter, and obviously we're talking about boards, so boards actions matter, and but you need everybody rowing in the same direction to really get the results that you want.
Great points. And actually, when you think about alignment too, it's not that every part is identical, right? So obviously your work is very different than a classroom teacher's work, but because you would be in alignment, you're not working counter each other. That's a really important point, Dave. Thank you. Okay, so any other thoughts? I'm going to just keep moving. Okay, great. So now let's start to see what the research start to show us. So this is what they started to cull out of the research in terms of looking at not only what the board does again, but how they do it. These are commonalities between school boards whose students have great outcomes. Okay, that there is alignment, and these are the specific points. And so, you know, again, you all have been doing this work for a while, but I'd like to see if there's any statements in here that again resonate with you or surprise you. And I'm going to give you a second because this is kind of a dense slide, but I'm going to start with you, Bridget, if there's anything in here that resonates or surprises.
I need a little bit more time.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, Flip, I'm going to go next with you then, if you have, and we can keep passing until people have enough time.
I would say, I don't think what I really appreciate about this board and our staff, I have not heard number 4, that all students can learn. I haven't heard anybody expressing limitations on our students. And that's what I really appreciate, is that there's no categorization, there's no kind of siloing of, you know, those students or these students. I don't hear those kinds of words from our staff, which is great. And so I think that that's an important piece, no matter where students are coming from, how new they are to this country, if they, you know, whatever their additional learning supports may be. That to me is one of the key pieces, because then that helps feed on number 10, which is decisions that are best for student success. Because if you have those expectations that all students can learn, and they all can learn, they're not all going to learn at the same rate or pace, then hopefully that's centering on what's best for students. So I see those two as really being student-centered, and that's, you know, we kind of are trying to get to the clarity and the alignment, but I think we have those shared thoughts and ideas about wanting what's best for student success, and that all students can learn.
You know, and what I love about that, Flip, is you're pulling out themes from this as well, which is something kind of fun to do as well. And how you've tied it to your work. That was very helpful. And Jan, again, if you're comfortable sharing out loud, or you'd like to type. Oh, look at you, you're planning ahead now. Number 10, right? The moving target, number 10 is the moving target we must continually learn about. That's true. This is not implying that there's going to be static state in any of this work, right? You know, there's nothing in here saying that you'll reach a finish line, right? And the idea that Jan has typed in about it's a moving target, that you want to keep working. And I think actually that ties into Flip's sustainability thought as well. If you create a system that can focus on what's best for student success, that will by definition have to evolve with what students need. That's a great point, Jen. And Dave, do you have a thought?
Sure, continuing with the number 10, I think, yeah, because they're obviously the focus on students. The interesting question is, how do you define student success? And there's a billion, you know, many ways to do that. And I think we're in the process. And, you know, when I think of, you know, the whole movement around mastery-based learning and defining what success is really the, you know, kind of the crux of, you know, where you need to kind of start to align the organization around, you know, what that is.
A very good point, Dave. Again, you know, it's sometimes, again, to keep adjusting, as Jan was talking about, you have to understand how you're going to measure that. Measurement's a really important part of this work. You're absolutely right. And Edna, do you have any thoughts? Anything pop out to you, or any themes?
No, I just see areas that we do a relatively adequate job, and areas that we definitely need to concentrate on. But overall, I think our hearts are all in the right place, and we're all working towards this.
Right, absolutely. And I think it's important to model as a board a growth mindset. The fact that the board could identify areas where it needs to grow and work through that, I think is great modeling it as the top of this organization. That's an important point to call out. So thank you for that. Bridget, do you have anything pop out or any themes you see?
I'm a split between 3 and 10, so I'll just be real quick on both maybe.
Yeah.
The best for students, that just that kind of language, I'd like to reframe that it's student centered, that we're really centering the student in our decisions. So that's kind of like why I'm kind of split. And then the culture of collaboration, a culture in which there's shared power, and with collaboration, we do not always have to believe the same things or think the same way, but but all those rich viewpoints add to the, actually can make things better for more people, hopefully all people. But so that's my answer.
I think that's a great answer. And if you look at number 2, actually, the theory, the theme of respect and collaboration within these, and I think that's some talk about the what and some talk about the how. And I think you have a really good point there, Bridget, that if we're going to think of each student, you need diversity of life experience, of viewpoints, in order to create, pardon me, in order to create a school district that does support each student. It's really important as a board to foster that culture of collaboration, right? And part of it is to help support all the different kinds of students you serve, as well as, again, modeling, right, for the organization. So thank you for picking up on the collaboration theme. So any other thoughts before we move on? Okay, so now we're going to look, actually, so not only did the research start to find the areas where boards could do work and how they do their work that resulted in better student outcomes, there's actually behaviors that resulted in poorer student outcomes. So they actually found behaviors of boards that correlated with student outcomes that were below what the statistics might have suggested. Okay, so we're going to look into this as well. So they focused on, again, this isn't about, this is a growth mindset, right? So talking about how the board meetings actually work, this is not a pass-fail exercise, right? Just in terms of how the board does their work. It might not be obvious to some board members that certain actions during board meetings actually translate into decreased outcomes for students. And Jan, we're going to start with you on this one. But again, kind of looking for themes, looking for anything that surprises you, anything that really resonates with you on this list. All right, not yet. And we'll just keep going around. It's a lot to process a little bit. And Dave, do you have any thoughts, anything on this list that pops out to you?
Well, I think sometimes the tricky issue is number 8, less focus on policy items. Policy is always an interesting area because so much of policy is kind of dictated to us by the legislature and the state. I mean, a lot of it's
right,
CWs and WACs and so forth. And but discerning what we can do at the local level is it can be some tricky work. So anyway, that was kind of what caught my attention.
Well, which is a good point, because sometimes if it's handed to you from the legislature, you kind of have to spend some time on it because it didn't come organically from your district. That makes a lot of sense. Edna, anything pop out to you?
No, they just all kind of make perfect sense.
Right. Sometimes there's one of those funny correlations where things might make perfect sense. It's just, but nice to kind of see them.
I haven't defined,
right? Like validate perhaps what instincts would say.
Yeah.
Bridget, do you have anything pop out to you?
I guess the less time spent on student achievement and not only achievement, but just centering students in discussions, in our hearts, in our, that's what stands out for me.
You know, it's interesting. There's, I read this article once where it was talking about that whole idea, you know, not spending very much time on student achievement. And they called it the killer bees. Like it was like buses, basketball, like all like, so it's like sports, you know, transportation issues, like sometimes things that will bubble up to board meetings. Buildings, thank you, Jen. Yes, that will bubble up to board meetings that don't have to do necessarily with student achievement, but can take up a lot of time. And being cognizant of that, of making sure you direct your energies back to student achievement. And bonds, yes. Thank you, the killer bees. Very helpful. What about, and we'll get to you, Jan. I have a nice little circle in my Zoom screen in case you haven't picked up on the fact. So, but Flip, you're next on my nice little circle. Is there anything that pops out to you from a superintendent perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I can totally understand, excuse me, where this is coming from. I don't find this the case here in Tukwila, but previously in, excuse me, other places where I've served, board candidates would run their campaign on a particular item. So
Right.
for instance, I had one time where someone was running on a issue related to the football coach, and that's kind of their item. And I had one that was very anti-WASDA, interestingly enough.
That is interesting enough.
So I think on those they were not necessarily focused on, you know, the policy items. The student achievement was not really their deal, and they had some challenges listening respectfully to others because they had their particular agenda. And it took a little while, and then they realized that there was more to the position than just their one item. But I haven't seen that, you know, I haven't seen any of the board members here running on a particular piece, but nationwide, you hear about that all the time. Sometimes people are running on a curriculum item, and some see it as a way in for political influence for things later on. You know, this is where they're starting, and then they're seeking a political office somewhere else. And again, I don't see that from any of the board members here. I think they're all very interested in working on behalf of Tukwila, and I don't see anybody who has eyes to try and have a political office somewhere else down the line. But I have seen that in other places.
And it can really bog down the business, can't it? Yeah, that's a nice testimony for your board too. And Jan, so any thoughts? Okay, you can see where number 5 could be a problem, as new staff often take time to build trust. Yeah, you have several new admin professionals that we don't know very well, but we're getting there. So the idea is less good working relationships with the governance team. And you're talking not only relationships within the governance team, which would be you all in my little Zoom circle, but with the cabinet, with new admin outside, correct? Cabinet and board, yeah. And that takes some advanced boardsmanship probably to get that going too, because the board obviously, right, has that direct connection with the superintendent, but does need to have relationships and be informed by the work of the cabinet for sure. It's nice of you to call that out. That's something that you can work on for sure. Any other thoughts on this before we move on? Okay, great. Oh yeah, go for it.
How do we foster those relationships?
Well, with the cabinet?
Yes.
You know, I think it's been, well, obviously, through, sometimes it happens through meeting time, right? And, you know, casual interactions, sometimes before or after me, you know, when you just, sometimes small talk goes a long way, right? You know, just to get to know about people, but without going into, you know, board members are in that fishbowl, unfortunately, right? And so if you're having a conversation, say with your chief financial officer, and you're curious about something, there's a difference between being curious about, okay, this financial report I had a question on, versus starting to say, well, I think this is how it should work. You have to be very careful not to be directive, because of course, administration wants to support the board and kind of make the board happy, right? And so Bridget just said her connection's unstable. So hopefully she'll be able to, we'll kind of pause here a little bit. She has frozen here. We're going to keep an eye on you, Bridget, if you can still hear us. But yeah, so you have to just be careful about perhaps getting to know them and understand them and respect them without inadvertently giving them conflicting direction, right? That's one reason why you have that one interface of the superintendent. Oh, yay, there's Bridget, right? So having Dr. Herndon to interact with you, who can then, distill all the board, thoughts around a subject into one piece of direction, and then get that direction off to the rest of the organization. You run the risk as board members, again, using that example, if there were 4 or 5 different thoughts given to a cabinet member, it could give them paralysis, right? And so, but, it's nice, you get to know people you work with, make some small talk, and respect their work. Also gratitude, expressing gratitude is a great way to form a relationship with cabinet members too. They work really hard. Any other thoughts or questions on this one? All right, we're going to keep going. We're working down a funnel in case you haven't noticed. But the next one, so all that research informed the WASDA school board standards, which is what the self-assessment is based off of. Literally, the self-assessment is based off of indicators within the school board standards that talk about the what and the how that support 5 core principles of effective boards. Okay, the first one is practicing responsible school district governance. And then there's communication of and commitment to high expectations, right, for students. Again, that's student-centered. Creating conditions for district-wide student and staff success. So this is the part of the board's responsibility to make sure there's the resources available to do the work. Holding the district accountable, that measurement piece. And then engagement of the community in education. Okay, so all that research was distilled by WASDA in the early 2000s into these board standards. And what's been great, actually, fun fact, is all the board self-assessments that have been done by school boards since it got started 18 years ago has been tracked by researchers. And other states actually have adopted these standards. So Texas, Minnesota, Arizona, there's one more, 4th one. So there's 5 states now using our standards. And so researchers track how boards rate themselves and then look at student outcomes. And this research is just continuing to build. So any questions about the WASDA school board standards? I can get you a PDF of this if you'd like. If you don't already have a copy, if you want to dive into all the indicators, but you basically went through them all in this self-assessment. So now what we're going to do, we're going to go into the reports. So you received 2 versions of the answers, okay? The one over here with the colored bars, this is the first page, and this is the report. I'm going to pull it up here. It's titled the Online Board Self-Assessment Survey. And then this is here a summary page. So what the report did is take the answers for all the questions and pull them into those 5 main standards. So you can see all the questions that had to do with standard 1 about responsible school board governance. This is the summary, okay? And did that for the 5 standards. And then after you turn that page, it goes into each answer, okay? The second report you got, which is, again, is the self-assessment survey score ranking. Okay, what this does, and this will be helpful for our little exercise today, it took the average response and rated it from the highest response that you gave yourself all the way down to the lowest response. Okay, because when you're flipping through the larger, I call this the rainbow report, the larger bar graph report, it's not always as easy if you want to rank, and we're actually going to a little bit, it's not always apparent. So the ranking report is to try to help you a little bit. But there's something I want to say really firmly up front. And again, this is not your first board self-assessment. This is not a pass-fail exercise. This is a growth mindset exercise. You all invest so much time in your professional development. The whole idea behind this is to help you focus where to put your time, right? How to weave it into your equity work. We will definitely at the end get into that, right? But you as the school board, your equity work is different than the rest of the organization. And so understanding where you are in terms of what you do and how you do it, and what areas in that realm will actually support your equity work and how you work together to lead the organization. Okay, so this is, it can be challenging for some boards because of course, every board wants to do best, but really it's understanding where you are so you can understand where you're getting ready to grow. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. So what we're going to do a couple exercises. So everyone has the results, correct? Okay. And then also,
Amy, can I ask
yes.
a question about,
Absolutely.
when I was looking at this board self-assessment survey score ranking, I was trying to understand, is this just for the 2021 score, or is this averaged over the 4 years that it looks to me like it's averaged over 4 years, so it's not the 2021 ranking?
It is supposed to be, the ranking is supposed to be just this year's results, where in the first page, this summary that I showed you shows the chronology. But this one page of the first page of the rainbow report is the only one that shows results from previous years. So you can see over time the summary. But I know what you're saying though, because when I was going through, there were some items, because I printed out this report for you all too. There were some items that got similar results that were ranked differently. Is that what you picked up on, Dave?
Well, the numbers just don't jive. I mean, I was looking at question 19 for 2021. So we had one person gave it a 4 and 3 people gave it a 3, and that doesn't come out to 3.6. I mean, the math doesn't work. So I don't think it's, I mean, yeah. Average.
How it's always been, it's a, and I see your question, just so you know, Jan, so, and we'll get to it in a second here. We'll finish with Dave. So, you know, because again, when I was going through this, preparing yesterday, I noticed things that didn't quite make sense as well. And I had always been told it was for 1 year, but I wonder if you haven't caught something, Dave, because I couldn't figure out, there were several that again had similar responses, but that were ranked differently. And so, and like you said, sometimes the math doesn't work. I don't
think it's kind of radically different.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's not worth obsessing over it, but it would be interesting to get that clarified.
Yeah, and I'm going to make a note of that. So we can look it up, because it's one of those things where, again, someone set up a program to help us take the results and automate the reports. And if there's a problem with the algorithm, we need to know that. Okay, and now I'm going to look. Jan typed in, she had trouble sometimes between some of the time and never. I wanted a rarely. Oh, that's really interesting. I wanted a rarely and went to never instead of some of the time. Might have skewed my answers. And that's totally okay, Jan. Honestly, this is, I think the biggest benefit about this is looking for themes and having the conversations, right? Because it's about building aptitudes as a board and identifying goals, and looking at things, to Flip's earlier point about sustainability. If there's work the board needs to do, to some foundational work to make the rest of the work more sustainable, that's really important. So if I noticed too, sometimes there were only 3 responses on some of the questions. Sometimes people didn't answer, which is, again, okay. Okay. What we're going to do is go into finding themes. And then again, this is a funnel exercise. We're going to distill and look for themes. And then again, weave it into some of the other work you all have been doing. Any other questions about the reports themselves? Okay. You also, pretty sure I emailed this yesterday, but I wanted to make sure I didn't make a mistake and not send it to you, but you also should have a little Word document that will help you track some responses. So they're broken into 3, right? Areas of strength, areas of growth. And so we're going to work with this, or you can actually use a piece of paper if you don't print it out. It doesn't really matter. But what we're going to do, we're going to look at the results, and whether it's easier for you to use the rainbow report or the ranking, either one, we're going to just analyze the results and talk about it. And I'm going to be taking a lot of notes during the conversation. But the idea is, again, to look for themes and help you prioritize where to spend your time. And maybe there's other areas you want to learn more about. We're going to talk about that as well. But the first one I want you to do is think about areas of strength. I want you all to look at the reports, look at the areas and the questions where you rated yourselves highest. And again, patterns and themes are really relevant at this point. Maybe you'll notice that a lot of the areas, the high rankings, were in certain areas, right? And then we're going to break down why do you think something is a strength of the board and how can you maintain that? It's the whole sustainability question. Okay, so, but I want to give you several minutes to do this. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes. And if you are done before that, either enter in the chat or maybe use your reaction to throw up a raised hand or something. But let's give you 5 minutes. I will mute myself and we'll come back at about 9:52, 9:53.
Just a clarification question, Amy. Are we looking at the strengths only at this time for this
Yep.
first round? Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, Bridget. We have a little under a minute left if anyone needs more time, but let me know. But I just wanted to give you a little heads up. So almost time to wrap up this part. Oops. There we go. Life with. All right. So I'm going to mute myself just because I'm going to be typing and I don't want that to be like distracting in case that pops into the microphone. But let's start with you, Edna, in my little circle. So in terms of, and again, it's not like you have to list a certain amount of answers, but let's just start talking about what popped out to you and if you saw any themes.
I think our expectations for students and staff is and has been very high, and I think it continues to be so. I think we put a lot of trust with Flip, which is honoring his roles and responsibilities. Those are the things that really jumped out at me.
Thanks, that's perfect, Edna, thank you. Dave, what about you? Anything pop out?
Yeah, I think I was kind of focusing on standard 3, creating conditions. So when we're looking at how we've done technology, safety standards, securities, facilities, monitoring budgets, all those kind of nuts and bolts things of keeping the physical plant and everything in pretty good shape. So I think those are the ones that stuck out to me.
Perfect, thank you. And Bridget, what about you?
So as for themes, I agree with Edna. Those are the same themes that I identified as well. I also had a bit of a reaction to a couple of the standards. So standard 1 and standard 5. So standard 1, treat all individuals, including fellow board members, staff, students, and community members with respect. And that one really hit me because I know that we're looking at this through, our own lenses, but also like we're responsible for other community members' lenses as well. And time and time again, even though this is one of our higher ones, the feedback from the community is not necessarily that. And so that just it sat really uncomfortable with me. And then in terms of the transparency, that was number 5. I was thinking about, when with COVID, the closures, the online learning, the reopening, now quarantining, ESSER funds, in terms of, how as a board are we communicating these things out? Do we, I was thinking as a board, we don't even do any communications out to the other than during board business or during meetings and during board business. And so that one's I'm just sitting uncomfortably with too.
Well, and we're going to get into opportunities for growth as well. So I have started that with opportunities for growth because absolutely we want to talk about topics like that. But in terms of strengths, Bridget, you mentioned talking about Edna, so expectations for students you agreed with, right? Trust with Flip and honoring the superintendent's role. Is there anything else under strengths you'd want to drop in
Absolutely.
there?
No, I align with what Edna shared. So we're 2 for 2 on that one.
Oh, perfect. You were just moving ahead in class and getting on to the
Sorry.
next slide on. See, that's overachiever. Here we go.
It's just it's a
Great.
physical reaction that happens when, you know, I'm just sitting with that discomfort right now.
Well, and it's complex topics. They're right, like they're not one dimensional. So absolutely. Absolutely. But so let's go ahead then and move on to the next one. So opportunities for growth. Oh, before I stop, I have to make sure I'm facilitating correctly. So Jan, because she's at a Starbucks, right? She doesn't have access to all the reports in a printer and things like that. But I just wanted to give you a chance, Jan, if there's anything any thoughts you have about strengths, understanders, or anything to add. Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so let's move on then. And so another 5 minutes. Let's do opportunities for growth. Same idea. Let's think about themes. Let's think if, you already started to identify maybe some standards for you, Bridget, that these might be clustered under, right? And so I love that you board lists to improve so much, actually. So let's do this. Another 5 minutes. So we'll do 10:03.
So Amy, did
Mhm.
Flip have an opportunity to do the
Well, so Flip as superintendent is here to learn and support, but
Okay.
these are all board behaviors, right? And so this is more work for the board specifically.
Okay,
Um,
just don't want to leave them out.
you are no, and you're right. Actually, we should explicitly say that if Flip ever wants to contribute any thoughts to this, usually I tend to focus on the board as well. And see, he's appreciative of you thinking of him. See, there it is, trusting Flip and honoring him. Look at this board honoring their superintendent. It's perfect. Again, you don't want to take that for granted. That doesn't happen with every board. And it might be intuitive for you all, but it's not the same for every board. So, but yeah, let's move on. I'll stop talking and let's think about opportunities for growth. Okay, how's everyone doing? Anyone need more time? Okay. So I'm sorry, this is life of a Zoom facilitator. My screen is just like crazy here. I think I spent half my time making sure I'm clicking on the right thing, but I want to take notes here. So in terms of opportunities for growth, I want to start with you again, Bridget, right? Because you were getting going here. But before we do actually, so Jan and I were having a little chat conversation. She did have area of strength that she wanted to point out. So do you want to put it in the chat, or do you want to think about it some more, Jan? We're mapping it to a question. Okay, yeah. So Jan, if you all can see her chat, she was very mindful of the fact that everyone on the board has great gifts that bring expertise in various areas that ends up being a strength for your board, right? An asset. And so maybe we can help her because she doesn't have the reports printed out. So maybe I was looking to see where that might have fallen in. I was thinking question 18 in terms of treating all individuals with respect was ranked relatively high. Does anyone else see where there was a question that might track to that? That's not exactly the same thing, which I agree with. I don't know if actually that specific thought is captured in the standards, Jan. That's a great insight to share. That you value, right? Seeing the value of your fellow board members and everything they bring to the table. I don't know if there's an exact parallel to that in the indicators and questions.
I guess one that maybe I'm looking at 21, use collaborative process that results in well-informed problem solving and decision making. It's not exactly that, but it's refers to that.
Mm-hmm. And let's see how you rated yourselves on that one.
Kind of middle.
Yeah, kind of middle. Right? Mostly some of the time, but a little bit of most of the time, right? All right, well, thank you for, again, I'm just trying really hard to make sure we're helping you participate in this as well, Jan. So, but let's transition. I saw that as involving the community, which we don't do very well. So that's a good point, actually. And I think I'm trying really hard to transition over to Bridget's thoughts, right, that she started on before, because I want to have you keep expanding on those, Bridget. So under standard 1, treating everyone with respect. Let's talk about that, because that's just building off of what Jan was saying, that question 18 in terms of treating each other on the board with respect and staff and community could actually be 3 different things. What do you think, Bridget?
Yes, I agree.
All right, so I'm going to make a note of that, actually. So so in terms of I had taken a note what you said before, Bridget. I just want to dive deep into this because I think this is a really great place to start. Being responsible for community lenses as well. Is there anything else I should capture in terms of what you were thinking there?
I guess I'll just, I have a couple memories. So before COVID hit and before we started meeting online, I remember walking into, the boardroom as a parent first before I ever became a board member, and just kind of recognizing like how our 2 students were off to the side, and our 2 students are the people of color on the board. And then even when they joined our table and we were looking from the front of the room to the back of the room, the two students were at the end and I was next to them. So in thinking about just even, I mean, that right there is an example of sort of a analysis of, you know, what, I don't know if folks noticed that or were aware of that, but that's just one example of thinking about intentional practice and what type of a message would that send to the students, our student leaders, what kind of message does that send to communities of color or anyone visiting the meetings in terms of, you know, and then even
Oh no, you froze again. That was so good. Bridget, you must be unstable again. Dang it. Let's give her a second here.
I hope you can hear me.
Oh, now we can, yes. Can you keep going? So the last we heard was, and I was typing furiously, talking about intentional practices and what messages the board sends to communities of color. That's where, yes.
Yes, I'm going to move closer to my router so I don't get disconnected. I've got a teen and a tween online right now, so I know the internet is limited. So I would say that, you know, even on our policies, so when you look at signatures, even now that I serve as vice president, there's times in terms of where are the positionality of our names on the website, positionality of names, who gets called director and who gets called by their first name, things like that. So those are just like, I mean, I could go on and on, even just how minutes are taken and whose minutes are correct, and then, you know, at times whose minutes are not correct or not taken at all. So I've even prepared notes to give to our secretary to make sure that those notes are included in the meeting minutes. So just, you know, things like that. I mean, I don't even know if you folks are even aware of it, but that's just, I mean, just like that's this much of observations.
So this is me attempting to pull all these strands together. I might not get this right. But in terms of what you're saying, in terms of the idea of treating people with respect, that it's actions big and small, right? The continuum of how the board interacts with community, with each other, not, you know, through all both the formal interactions as well as the informal. Am I capturing that correctly?
Yes, and I think it's about power and who has power and who maintains power, that there are different levels of power at play here within our group and positionality, you know? So I thought it, like, even when Tracy left and I've served as vice president, it was fascinating to me that the group, you know, selected Jan for the interim for the last 3 months. Thought to myself, now this is interesting, you know, and so like, what is the message there? Is the message to remind me that I'm not to be president, or that I'm not enough of whatever it is that, you know? So there's these power and privilege at play constantly. I remember there was a community meeting. We were having a meeting, and there was about 5 or 6 what appeared to be Latinx community members, and they ended up being parents of kindergartners or preschoolers, and there were no chairs left. And everybody just kept the meeting going, and everyone ignored them. And I got up and I got chairs because I thought to myself, what? These folks took time out of their day, very long day, I'm sure, to show up into a very unwelcoming space. And business as usual, we ignored them, and they had to stand. That doesn't look all right. That sends lots of messages to me as a person of color in terms of how our community gets treated. So these are the things I'm talking about, that we could say it's respect and that we're respectful to each other, but I don't think as leaders, I really do think that this group really needs to really learn how their actions harm and how how we use our, I'm part of it too. So how we use our power harms and hurts and continues to send messages to our young leaders of color that will let you in the room, but you can't sit with us. And if we let you sit with us, you're going to be at the end. Fascinating, messages like that gets and I'm sharing this because I'm a product, I going through education, and the messages that get sent in the rooms again and again, and then as an educator, how I get treated by colleagues, and then even as a leader, educational leader, how I get treated by colleagues, So I'm going to just pause because this is something that we could always talk about later too, but that's understanding our power and how our power and privilege harms people. And if someone says something, paying attention to it, that it's important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Bridget. And I think, we're going to keep diving into this conversation all morning, actually, right? Because it's really important on multiple layers in order to have this conversation. Because again, in order to do right by the students, the board needs to improve its ability to collaborate and be respectful, right? And having feedback about that and incorporating it and building on it is really important, right? And so thank you for sharing that. And I want to honor the fact you want to take a second, but we're gonna. I don't want you to think that means we're moving on from it. I want to build, right? I want to build, and so I want to see if anyone, instead of me calling on someone, if anyone wants to build next in terms of opportunities for growth. Maybe think about what Bridget just had to say in terms of, and maybe using the results here as a guide, in terms of some questions that were answered. If there's anything else, I'm gonna look for a volunteer, but I think it's, and maybe we want to process what Bridget had to say for a second and think about another area for growth. Again, not saying that we're leaving it behind, saying that we're building, but who would like to contribute an opportunity for growth? Okay, and Jan has typed in chat. I think one area for growth comes from director, and you have to help me with this, Director AR? Oh, right, yes. You're using Bridget's title, thank you. For me is to have the conversation about what respect looks like for everyone. That is really helpful. Jan, what does respect look like for everyone? Thank you for contributing to that, Jan. That's really helpful. Each of us. Thank you. Thank you for the correction. That's an important one. And you have unmuted, Jan. Is there anything you'd like to chat about? I just wanted to make sure. We're happy to listen to Starbucks. But Edna or Dave, any thoughts or anything else, again, what we want to build on here?
I think
yeah, go for it, Edna.
I see a common thread of communication as an area that we really need to focus on. And a lot of that, which Bridget has pointed out several times, which we appreciate, is that we respect others by communicating with them, and we need to do a much better job of doing that. It is definitely apparently an area of weakness that we've heard continually, not only from the community, but from the staff.
Okay. Thank you for that. And I like the communicate with, not communicate. You didn't say communicate to. right? It's with, right? Which is a very important distinction.
Yeah, I think, so I appreciate Bridget's had a list of things there. So that's good for, it will increase my sensitivity to all those areas. And I think we can, we ought to be able to improve, all those issues, whether it's, positions on signing or, respecting parents when we get back into the boardroom, all of those things. Yeah, it's kind of raised my level of sensitivity to that. So that's great. And we can work on those. For me, the growth areas that I was looking at was under standard. Standard 4 and standard 5 seem to be the general areas that had the weakest results. And for me, when I was unpacking standard 4, a lot of it seemed to be about kind of not having a district or a district plan in place. So we have a district direction, but we're still working on, and I think Ted Howard is working on, our CAO is working on, a district plan, district improvement plan, and translating those things into something more concrete. So I think, that's an area that we're working on. And the other one is standard 5, the engage local community and represent the values and expectations they hold. And so that one, Bridget has presented to the board, ways to elevate community voice and communication. So that's a list that we have that we're going to be discussing, I think, soon at the next meeting or whatever. So I think that's kind of at the crux of that one. So I think we're in the process of working those two areas. So those are the two, and I guess, yeah, the other, yeah, those are the two areas that I saw. So
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate that. And I want to add, so Jan added another layer onto the communication conversation about asking what kind of communication is needed, not just what works for Jan, she said me, or the board, right? Making sure the communication is not just with, but is what the community needs, which I think is a helpful distinction as well. And I'm typing that up. This is right, obviously an interesting and important, I'm sorry, I meant to say important area of conversation, and I want to ask, if you don't mind, I'm going to take a facilitator privilege. There's a question in here that that I would have put in the opportunities for growth, and I didn't see anyone bring it up. I'd like to go to question 4. If y'all could. So I'm looking at the main Rainbow report. And the question, Jan, for your benefit is, to what extent does the board base its decisions on what's best for student success? So this is one of the questions where not everyone responded. We got total 3 responses, 2 in some of the time and 1 in I don't know. And so I think this is, again, because you have continually talked this morning about being student-centered. And so, and this all ties together with Bridget's important points about respect and power and privilege, right? In terms of collaborating together and communicating, right? And because you obviously also have such a passion for supporting students, I just want to explore this one a little bit and see what people were thinking. Again, sometimes these questions are so general, right? To Jan's point earlier, you don't know if there should be a rarely in there. But so let's explore this question for a second. And again, I'm not going to choose anyone to go first. I want to see if anyone wants to pop up their thoughts.
Yeah, I can start. So this is the whole area for me. This is kind of student voice, which is included in, as I mentioned, Bridget's ways to elevate community voice. That includes student voice. So there's a whole set of discussions we can have around, how to, how to get, a better input from students. From, we forgot an issue now. We've had always, and there's a whole set of things, but student representatives on our board, but our student representative hasn't been attending for quite some time, and so we need to figure out what's going on with that. And then there's a whole other, set of ways that we can, go out to students as opposed to having them come to us, kind of thing. So to get better input. So that's a whole big area of, I think, opportunity, which I put in this whole kind of category. It's, question 4 is listed under 1, but it's also, kind of equally applicable in my mind to standard 5, which is engaging the community, which of course includes students.
Right. Yeah, because that's very important, right? And actually, I think it does build off of what Bridget was saying earlier in terms of how interactions, even within the boardroom, right, in terms of how students are interacted with, are very important. But in terms of how this question is worded, and perhaps people read the question differently, but in terms of the board basing its decisions on what's best for students, it's a complex question. It's not straightforward as the 8 words would indicate, 9 words. But in terms of how people answered the way they did, that's what I'm kind of curious about. Again, not a right or wrong answer, but it helps us identify where to help invest time in professional development, right? Because this is pretty fundamental, and it would be helpful, I think, for you all to support you in terms of how, if people are needing support in this area, how can we help? Okay, so Jan has said here, laws have a racist bias, OPMA assessments, even COVID inequities, which block the abilities or at least limit. So in terms of all of the constraints within a board, how a board has to do its work, Jan, is that's what you're thinking? That you aren't always flexible and have the flexibility to base your work on how you would like to support students. Am I interpreting that correctly? Okay. And Edna, do you have any thoughts?
No, I'm just trying to process I'm just trying to work on processing it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And we don't.
I was trying to evaluate what work would help Bridget feel more validated and more comfortable, because that's very concerning for me. So I think my mind wandered over there. Okay,
well, which is important. And I am taking a list of themes, and does this, what you were thinking of, Edna, does it fall within how Jan worded it in terms of what does respect look like for each of us?
Yeah. Okay. I think I kind of got stuck on that strand, so sorry.
No, that's actually the fact that you would not perhaps trivialize what Bridget shared is really important and commendable. Okay, so maybe we put this question 4 in the parking lot for now, because there's another interesting way we can start looking at this survey. Okay, which is, this is why I call this the rainbow report. So, and this
Amy,
Yes, Dave.
just before you move out of that, I
Yes,
just had a couple of thoughts. One,
please.
that question, is interesting because what is best for student success? So it comes back to one of my original points was how do we define student success? Which opens up for me, the whole area of kind of mastery-based learning and what a lot of districts, I think your district is doing this, graduate profiles. So what do we think students, how do we define student success? And then as far as, you're talking about student voice, well, I was talking about student voice. I mean, there's a whole set of ways that we can do that. And have been done in our district before. The high school has a project they've been doing for years about having students create what they call public service announcements around issues that they care about. So it's and they produce these things and present them to the public, and a lot of the areas they concern are issues. I mean, sometimes they're related to the school, sometimes they're related to the city, sometimes they're related to the state, but there's a real opportunity for us. COVID kind of put a squash on those, but I'm sure they'll be starting up again. And they give students a really, within the context, I'm a big fan of kind of integrating the real world into the classroom. And so they're getting credit for, looking at their world, thinking about their world, what would help in their world, and then presenting that. And then the next step that I think hasn't been taken so much is then having those presentations and the bodies that oversee them, whether it's the school board or the superintendent or the city council or the mayor, having real conversations with the students about those issues. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for engaging students in that way. And I've got a bunch of other ideas along those lines, but I just wanted to throw that out there.
No, those are great ideas. And thank you for pausing me. This, you all absolutely should. Right. And because those are great ideas to capture, what you talked about in terms of a profile of a graduate, Dave, the thing that's attractive about doing one, even though we know the state board is working on that for the states, but to do one with your community, the exercise of doing it can be really powerful. Right. Because again, you first of all, you elevate away from test scores. Right. And in order to do it, it has to come from the community. I mean, the board could do it. The board could sit down in a bubble and write down what the board thinks a graduate, the profile of a graduate in their mind. But for it to really be meaningful, it has to come from the community, right? And staff actually too. And then the board takes that feedback and basically sometimes the board's role, not all, I mean, the board should have a voice too, obviously, but then the board's role can be back to that sustainability question. How do we help take the community's desire of what graduates, what skills they should have, the values we want to impart, and how do we codify it, for lack of a better term, and put it in the concrete, right? Because that's the board job right there. So you're helping the community. And so by taking their desires and putting it in a place where it's sustainable over time.
And I can guarantee you that students have a lot of opinions on that issue.
I'm sure they do. You might have, right, again, parents, right, would have a lot of feelings on the issue. Community, or maybe people hiring in your community, right? There could be a lot of different voices, because in terms of cultural aspects of what families want for their graduates, right? It's really important. You don't want to take just a one-dimensional view again of the richness. I mean, when I think of Tukwila, I think of an incredible richness, right? Like almost, I'm trying so hard to avoid cliches, but you know, like how salt, sometimes you get that really good salt that has like 3 dimensions to it, and it's just like incredibly rich, like because it's just amazing. Like the fancy salt sometimes you get when you go out for your birthday, right? Like where you can see the crystals, and like this, like tequila has all these facets to it, and it's amazing, right? And it's such an asset to your community that not every community has. And you know, in terms of that idea about how to access that, and for a profile of a graduate, actually could be really exciting. But before, you know, so before we come up, it's really important actually in leadership not to come up with solutions before we've properly identified a problem, right? In fact, that's how things don't get fixed, actually. So before I get too excited about that, let's go back here though and make sure we scope out before I move on, because actually the third question is really interesting, and we'll build off of this, I promise. It's not an either and, it's either or, it's an and, our next conversation. But in terms of anything else we want to explore in terms of the themes we have for opportunities for growth. So, you know, the themes we've been talking about, what does respect look like for each of us? How to elevate and incorporate, I would say, community voice and expectations, and student voice. How do we think about the continuum of how respect is communicated, right? Not just here or there, but the whole continuum of it. And for students as well as parents and everyone the board serves. But anything else in terms of opportunities for growth we want to chat about here?
I think what goes along with this is, how do we share power? And then Jan's comment about how oftentimes we are, you know, having to navigate between legislation and then codifying things and such. And I would insert there, how do we leverage our power and privilege? Because we ultimately also approve these things for our district. And, you know, and how do we leverage if there is something that could potentially be harmful? What are we doing with that? If there's something that benefits some people but not other people, then what are we doing with that? Rather than, you know, just voting it in. And so like that, we do have power and we do have privilege, and we, I think we oftentimes will say elevate community voice,
Right.
and it's like, really what you're doing is you're sharing power. You're at least I'd hope so, that
Right.
you're really taking into it. Well, if you're not sharing power, you're just listening to it and then doing what you're going to do anyways, whatever, you know, you're going to dismiss it or something like that. But if you're really sharing power, it's recognizing that, you know, where have I been wrong? When have I been checked? When have I, you know, what am I not seeing? And to realize how limited we are. We really are limited by ourselves as a board, without sharing power and collectively making community decisions. So that's what I just would add, that extra piece.
Oh, that's so helpful. Thank you. And there's 2 things that what you said resonated with me, and I want to see if anyone else has input too. First of all, just in leadership in general, you know, in terms of your point about community engagement, it can be really damaging to ask for input in a situation where you're not intending to incorporate it. Right? It's always best to be clear. Sometimes, again, if something comes in RCW, you might try to go advocate in Olympia and change it there, right? But if something comes to you in RCW, and you don't have much ability to work with it, setting expectations in the community that you do can be really damaging.
Right.
And then the other layer of what I think I hear you saying is that perhaps it's a decision the board wants to keep with itself anyways. Right? So before you ask for input, deciding as a board, okay, we should be transparent in who's making this decision, right? Because then you can have your community might not trust you. Am I hearing that correctly? If the board decides, if the board really means, and that's actually the board's purview, right? In some cases, right? You might decide that there are some things that you have to decide. But then not to ask for community input in those situations, because then you'll betray some trust. But there's one more thing I want to highlight, and actually I want to hold on to this for the rest of our time, is the idea of the board making decisions that might help some students and harm others, Bridget. And so that's something that's a really high level of boardsmanship. That's great for you to realize. New boards don't always focus on that this does not have to be what some people call a zero-sum game, that you don't have to make a choice where some students win and some students lose. You actually can avoid that, right? And given everyone's dedication to students, what we all started with this morning about, when you saw those happy graduates, what you all thought of, let's think about that. Maybe that's an area of growth. How do you learn how to do decision making so you can process decisions in a way and understand you're making a decision that helps everyone? So I'm talking way too much. So, but am I building off what you said correctly, Bridget? I just want to verify that first. You might be muted.
Yeah, I mean, like with OPM
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
or I think that there's limitations, but there's also, it's problematic, and for us to call
Right.
out the problems, call out here's how it's impacting our communities,
Mhm.
like not just saying, oh well, it exists, so that's what we have to do. It's like, no, we don't have to do that. We can actually we could actually as a board even chat, work with Senator Hasagawa and see, like, this is problematic, Senator Hasagawa, help us out here. Here's how it's problematic. So we can advocate, and we can also, as a brown woman, I have navigational capital. I've had to survive. And so how do you work around it? How do you work within those lines to make it happen so that that we are able to, because I think and is it okay to problematize, right? Like, that's the other thing. It's okay to problematize when something's not right for some people. Even if it's for some people, it's okay to call it out and say, this does not look right. This is not, and so there's ways that we can, and we have the power to do that. I have the power in my little world to do that if I so choose. And so I think that also sends messages to our communities where oftentimes they feel like they're just, it's business as usual and we're going to be ignored, and they're just going to keep doing what they're doing. And that rather than saying that, like, this really is problematic, this is bothersome. And so I think that is part. And then also maybe trying to figure out some, it doesn't have to be A, B, maybe it's plan D, E, F, figuring out ways to work with that in the community.
And so I've made a note. OPMA is something we can talk about at the end when we're going to synthesize. We can absolutely talk about that and think about in terms of, because that it could incorporate respect, definitely incorporating community voice, right? OPMA impacts a lot of these. Sharing power, right? Because OPMA is all about the how to work around this constraint that's been put on school boards, so you can, right, interact with the community as efficiently as possible. So I put that on a list here, but any other thoughts about this before we take just one more slice at the survey results?
Yeah, so the other, I think, dynamic in here when we're talking about board decisions generally is, respect for the superintendent and staff. Excuse me, and their, superintendents, are given the responsibility to do the day-to-day operations of the district. And so I think you mentioned it a little before, there's a line there where, board decisions start hedging into the responsibilities of the superintendent. That can be problematic by, essentially not showing respect for the staff and the superintendent. So that's the other dynamic that floats around in when we talk about, just board decisions in general, that I think we need to take into account.
Okay. Are there any examples you want to give there, Dave?
Well, I mean, the classic one for years, was in Seattle when they chose a math curriculum. I mean, the staff came to the board with a recommendation for a math curriculum, and the board just simply overruled them and said, no, we're going to go with a different math curriculum. I think that was a large overstep. In terms of, I think, for us, I think we've been having discussions about, assessments and what our assessment strategies should be. And so I think that's one where we need to, be working, rather than having the board just making decisions alone. It needs to be coordinated heavily with the superintendent and the staff. So.
Thank you for sharing that. Definitely got that down. That is incredibly important. Talk about sustainability. Any other thoughts in this before we move on? Okay, so this last one, and this will be we're going to take a break after this. Okay, we've been doing a lot of processing, but this is just one other way of slicing through the data. And sometimes you can pick up other things to talk about this way, is looking again, and this is the rainbow part of the rainbow report. So this will be a trickier one for you to do, Jan, but there are questions in there where there's a wide range of responses. You see blue, green, yellow, black, or red. Like, you see all sorts of different responses. It isn't necessarily all green. It isn't necessarily all red, but it can be really interesting to see where people are at different places. Okay, and we'll do this one really quickly. We've talked about such a rich amount of topics in the last one. This may not pull up anything else, but just in case it does find something interesting, let's just take 3 minutes and flip through that report and see if you see any rainbows in this year's responses that cover a topic that we haven't covered yet. And we're going to be shorter on this one in the interest of time. So just one more minute, if you could. Yeah, one more minute. And Dave, I think I'll have you start off on this one. when you get a chance, if you see any, and I'll zoom, I kept up the report on purpose in case we need to zoom to one that you identified, but are there any? And of course, we want people to answer differently. That's not a bad thing. But if there's any themes that pop up with the rainbow responses that we want to touch on before we wrap up this portion, anything pop out to you?
Yeah, I kind of saw three of them, I guess. Question 50, which is about, so I was just looking for ones that kind of have one in each bucket or something. So adopt a fiscally responsible annual budget that is aligned with the district's vision and plan. My assumption there is, and I don't, like I said, I don't know what everybody was necessarily thinking, but you know, for me, part of the issue is that we really haven't finalized a detailed district plan. So that may be part of that one. 45 was communicated expectation that all classrooms will implement effective instructional practices. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
an interesting one. I'm not sure quite how to interpret that one. And then the other one I had was question 40, which was adopt a budget that supports quality staff development and resources for curriculum implementation. So I think, you know, personally, we have a significant amount of work to do in terms of curriculum and, you know, we've talked quite a bit about, you know, professional development plan. How do we, there's always more desires for professional development in all kinds of different ways than there is time and money to do it. And so how do we sort through that to, you know, and fund through a budget, a high quality development plan that's gonna move toward, you know, one of the issues for me is always for years, the question on I think it's on one of our surveys that, you know, do you see yourself in your curriculum, and students, there's always a significant number of our students that say no to that. And so that to me suggests that we need to be really looking at our curriculum and the professional development related to it. So anyway, those are the three that hit me.
Thank you. No, and thank you for picking ones that we haven't chatted about before. Those are all great. And again, we're not here to problem solve everything, but just picking up the themes is super helpful. And so Edna, did any pop out to you?
I was looking at number 62.
Okay.
Regularly evaluate and adjust resources and strategies.
There it is.
That one was
Yeah.
all different kinds of answers. And I know when I was filling this out, I thought, I don't know if we do that. You know, just I like to believe that we do, but I don't know that we do.
Well, and that's actually identifying that you don't know is very powerful as well, right? In terms of identifying that. Anything else? That was a great one. Anything else?
And here we come back to communication. You know, it's like
which one?
Number 69 and 70. It's again perception of what we communicate and how we communicate it. It's just inconsistent.
Yeah, very good point. And Bridget, did any pop out to you?
Like Edna, also 62 stood out for me as well. And then I'm flipping here.
I'm trying not to make you all dizzy. Yeah.
Yeah, the 48, seek public input during budget process. So that was another one where all four of us were in different spaces when they answered that question. But that was interesting. So really maybe trying to figure out what's going on right there. Where are we on that one, right? And then there was one more. I'm trying to find it. There's just a lot. I think that's fine though. There was one more, but Two's good. I'm good.
Well, yeah, thank you. And I noticed when I was flipping through looking for them in terms of what we've already talked about, like, Edna pointed out the communication one, 69 and 70, right? That has been a big theme even in the rainbow answers. So thank you for finding other ones that aren't. So we could use a chance to stand up here, right? Maybe take care of some biological function. So, but any thoughts before we take a little break here? We're going to work with all this great processing. When we get back, I'm going to grab a glass of water. Oh, thank you. Jan says this is great. All right, so let's, 10 minutes. All right, so basically 11 o'clock, we're going to start back up again, okay? All right, thanks everyone. I may or may not have put a load of laundry in the dryer. Just saying. It is Saturday.
I may or may not have gotten a chocolate croissant. Just saying.
It's Saturday. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, you all are doing a lot of heavy lifting here. This is great. And so I want, after the break, glad everyone's good. I have my water refreshed, right? Like I said, might have snuck in a chore. But I'm going to do something a little different here because we're going to do some final goal setting and synthesize. And I think actually talking about OPMA might be a great way of kind of walking through some of the themes we've had this morning. So, but to do it, there's another theme that tends to come up when boards do self-assessments, and it came up with you all today. I'm glad, because sometimes this video fits and sometimes it doesn't. But I tend to be a fan of Simon Sinek, and so I think I've shown you one of his other videos before. But he does, probably because it pays the best, but he does leadership trainings for businesses, right? So this video will start off because he's doing a TED Talk basically for businesses. But I have one of his leadership books called Leaders Eat Last. And it's how leaders can create what he calls a circle of safety within an organization in order to help important work get done. And really, what more important work can there be than educating children? So here's him explaining why a circle of safety is important. And I think it's very relevant to what we've been talking about today in terms of not only asking for input, but incorporating input in terms of understanding how the continuum of actions, large and small, can have an impact on how people feel trusted and respected, how decision-making and power sharing can have impacts, and also that really high level thought we had, how to do the work in a way that produces positive outcomes for each student, not just everyone, but each student, right? That it is possible to do this work in a way that produces positive outcomes for each student and each family and each community member. But that's the highest level of the work, right? How do we get there? So please give me a thumbs down. Sometimes streaming videos doesn't work so well. And so if this becomes too choppy or annoyingly not streaming well, let me know and we can abandon it. But I just thought, again, it's another way of kicking off after the break before we dive into some work. So crossing my fingers, technology works here for us.
In the military, they give medals to people who are willing to sacrifice themselves so that others may gain. In business, we give bonuses to people who are willing to sacrifice others so that we may gain. Right? So I asked myself, where do people like this come from? And my initial conclusion was that they're just better people. That's why they're attracted to the military. These better people are attracted to this concept of service. But that's completely wrong. What I learned is that it's the environment. And if you get the environment right, every single one of us has the capacity to do these remarkable things, and more importantly, others have that capacity too. I've had the great honor of getting to meet some of these who we would call heroes, who've put themselves and put their lives at risk to save others. And I asked them, why would you do it? Why did you do it? And they all say the same thing, because they would have done it for me. It's this deep sense of trust and cooperation. So trust and cooperation are really important here. The problem with concepts of trust and cooperation is that they are feelings, they're not instructions. I can't simply say to you, trust me, and you will. I can't simply instruct two people to cooperate, and they will. It's not how it works, it's a feeling. So where does that feeling come from? If you go back 50,000 years to the Paleolithic era, to the early days of Homo sapien, what we find is that the world was filled with danger. All of these forces working very, very hard to kill us. Nothing personal. Whether it was the weather, lack of resources, maybe a saber-toothed tiger, all of these things working to reduce our lifespan. And so we evolved into social animals, where we lived together and worked together in what I call a circle of safety, inside the tribe, where we felt like we belong. And when we felt safe amongst our own, the natural reaction was trust and cooperation. There are inherent benefits to this. It means I can fall asleep at night and trust that someone from within my tribe will watch for danger. If we don't trust each other, if I don't trust you, that means you won't watch for danger. Bad system of survival. The modern day is exactly the same thing. The world is filled with danger, things that are trying to frustrate our lives or reduce our success, reduce our opportunity for success. It could be the ups and downs of an economy, the uncertainty of the stock market. It could be a new technology that renders your business model obsolete overnight. Or it could be your competition that is sometimes trying to kill you. It's sometimes trying to put you out of business, but at the very minimum is working hard to frustrate your growth and steal your business from you. We have no control over these forces. These are a constant and they're not going away. The only variable are the conditions inside the organization. And that's where leadership matters, because it's the leader that sets the tone. When a leader makes the choice to put the safety and lives of the people inside the organization first, to sacrifice their comforts and sacrifice the tangible results so that the people remain and feel safe and feel like they belong, remarkable things happen. You know, in the military, they get...
All right. So before we go too deep into this, I mean, obviously, to me, you could substitute the military for teachers very easily, right? So why do people dedicate their lives and careers to education? All this service, or there's so many other places you can make money, right? Another thing about this too, you know, talk about dangers from the outside. If you think about public education in the circle, oh my gosh, we could go crazy listing all the things out here. But you know, any reactions to the video and what he was saying about creating the importance of controlling the circle of safety?
There's that element of trust that we need to establish with the staff, students, community, each other.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you're on mute, Bridget.
I was going to share that in different spheres of influence. So if it's like with a patient in a clinical relationship, creating that safe space so that they can heal and that they can grow. With classrooms and groups of students, you know, creating a space in which folks feel that they belong, that they're important. And I'll bring up the power sharing again, in which folks take ownership and just to watch folks blossom into leaders themselves. And that's part of the work too, is really always thinking about other folks and how to empower them as leaders. And then of course out in the community, so community groups in which folks feel that they're important, that they matter, that it's we can be safe to come to and share, that we're don't have to be intimidating or hurtful. So those are the examples that I know. I see it on the daily, and it's powerful and it's awesome because I'm privileged and blessed to get to watch people blossom and grow.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Bridget. And any other thoughts that might come to mind, Jan or Dave? I'm happy to read a chat note again, Jan, if you'd like. You know, one thing I just wanted to point out, and as he was saying it, I wrote it down because I feel this is very relevant to what you all are talking about today, is creating the circle of safety is done where you create a place where everyone feels like they belong. And you could say each of us, if you want to. The circle of safety is actually about belonging, right? Which might be something to think about. And I don't know if you remember that the Maslow hierarchy, right? or, you start with physical safety, right? And that of your family. Before you get to achievement is belonging, right? So this work that can be challenging to talk about, how do you feel like all members of each member of your community belongs in a boardroom. Each member of your community belongs in a classroom. That actually, the reason why school districts across the country spend so much time trying to get this right is because that has to happen before achievement happens. Laszlo proved it over 100 years ago. So this is great work you're doing. It's hard work, right? So important. So
The other
important.
thing that comes to mind for me is the word we've also been using, that is respect. And so for me, that's a lot about two-way conversation. So in other words, when you're talking with somebody about whatever issue, you're not hiding information. So it's transparency. And so, yeah, having, listening with respect, and also, sharing whatever information you may have on the subject as well.
Very important point, Dave. Extremely important point. And Jan, I'm going to read out what Jan put in. Jan said, "This is one of the things I work daily in my work community as I try to establish the safe circle for hit their feet, to get their feet under them." I bet you that's spell check, to get their feet under them by being in a safe community, right? Today, I've had several texts from folks keeping one another safe while I'm gone, checking in with me. There you go. Right. And I think, this is something you could grow and do with each other too, right? To get a sense of community as a governance team, and this is a point, Flip, I'm going to pull you back into the conversation, in terms of creating a circle of safety as a governance team, creating a sense of belonging, because again, you're at the top of the organization, all of you, soon 5, soon to be 6, right? You have any thoughts on that, Flip?
I mean, I think what's been pointed out is, I echo a lot of those pieces. It's what I've been trying to work on with the cabinet, since a lot of them are, have been new additions over the last year or two, is making sure they have that sense to be open and honest. And then again, it's just trying to model that there. And sometimes it can be, it's vulnerable to really share some of the things out loud that you need to share. But it's important, because otherwise, if you're not surfacing those pieces, then you can't really continue to work on that, because people aren't open to that. And then to me, that continues to lead to like the siloing, because people aren't willing to tell you what's going on. I want the staff for sure to be able to share, especially if there are any concerns, so that they can bring them out, surface them, as quickly as possible. Otherwise, there are some legitimate impacts that could be far reaching to the organization. And if they're not surfaced and addressed quickly, then that can be challenging. Same with knowing, if there's a challenge going on with students, I want to know what that is, so that we can hopefully allocate some resources to get there as quickly as possible. So there are examples where we've done that well, and examples where we haven't done that so well. So the consistency can definitely be a challenge, but it's an important piece, establishing that ability for people to feel safe enough to surface even when they make mistakes, if there are mistakes that are made.
Right. And how important trust is to that whole process, I imagine, right? If they fear they're going to get in trouble with, right, Superintendent Herndon, are they going to be honest about something that went wrong? No. And then it won't get fixed, right? Right. So important, that culture you're creating. And then, within the board and superintendent team, the governance team, right, having the ability to talk, as you've been talking honestly today, that you can't grow without this.
And I think getting out there with the community and staff and students is such a vital part. We were talking earlier about how can the board establish a relationship with the administration team. And I was I'm so excited about Flip getting out into the buildings more so that the staff can get to really know him. Yesterday, he got quite an accolade. We lost one of our staff members, and he made sure that everything was covered, and one of the teachers was unable to go into her classroom. She was very devastated by this news, and he reassured her that everything would be handled for her. And that meant so very much to her. So just being able to see that side of Flip that I treasure, that once the staff gets to know him even better, will also see the value that he has to offer. So it's that trust,
Right.
because this district struggles with that. And so, yeah.
Well, that's a wonderful example, Edna. So for example, what an example that Bridget gave about the boardroom before, where, I think you said the Latina moms came in, Bridget, right? And we're looking for a place to sit, the ability to provide feedback on that didn't go well. How can we do better next time? Right. And then the board learning, I think it could be a parallel. So let's do this then. I'd like to, there are some themes that I've picked up, but of course, again, me talking too much is not the most effective workshop. So based off of what we've talked about today, and this is not a place, again, where we're coming up with the answers. We don't want to jump right to the answers right away, but I think identifying some goals for growth as a board, there's growth opportunities for the organization that we've talked about just, before we did the break, in terms of the budget process and all. The board obviously controls that. So, I don't want you to think too tightly within the board. I don't want to be misleading and say, oh, it has to just involve the 4, almost 5 of you. But I just want, it's okay if you come up with the same answer, but I do want to hear from everyone on this. So I am going to go around again. So be ready to type again, Jan. If you were to pick your top growth goal, and maybe I'm going to ask for 2 inputs from you, and then we'll see what commonalities are. I'm going to start typing again. But Edna, I want to start with you. As a board, and this could be, maybe there's an area you want to learn more about. It's a professional development goal. Maybe it's a skill, like there's a skill we have to develop more. Maybe, so it doesn't have to be just, I want to learn about how to do question 62 in the survey better, right? I want you to think a little broader, if that helps.
I think one of the things I would like to see the district do is validate people more and find ways to celebrate people's successes, no matter how big they are, and to communicate those and celebrate them. And I'd like to find ways to, let me give this some more thought.
No, that's cool. That's why we're going to go around, right?
Okay.
And and I want to ask, just in case it changes your answer, because you actually started that sentence that perhaps you didn't even realize, with the district. The district should validate people more. What about the board? Do you mean the board?
Oh,
To find a way to validate and celebrate?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, because I want to make sure, because again, this is a growth opportunity for you all.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the
Well,
district, right? The district, because they could be 2 different answers
Right,
in
right.
terms of district goals versus board goals. So I want to make sure. So you did mean
I
for the district,
everyone should be celebrating more. So as a board member, I would like to see us celebrate accomplishments and successes.
and I like that word, validate. Yeah. Thank you. So we're going with my Zoom circle again here, Dave. So you're up next on my Zoom circle. Do you have a growth goal you'd like to identify?
Yeah, so I'd like to just do one that, so at the last meeting, Bridget proposed the ways to elevate community voice, and we agreed to kind of start prioritizing that. So And that's,
Oh, I think you went mute. Unfortunately, Dave.
sorry, I hit.
Oh, that's okay.
I think I hit my keyboard.
Mhm.
So anyway, I'm not sure where I hit it. So anyway, what I would like to see is this continue the work that we started at our last meeting for Bridget's ways to elevate community voice. We agreed we were going to kind of prioritize things that we can do to work on that, and which feeds in directly to the standard 5, engage local community and so forth. So yeah, rather than suggesting something else, I think we should just do what we have started working on.
And it sounds like our conversations today supported that prior decision. Okay, thank you for sharing that. And Jan, you ready to type? Do you have a growth goal for the board? Listen to understanding as a two-way street. I'm not sure this is considered right, but I'm willing to learn I'm wrong. Okay, so I'm going to just copy and paste that into my list here, because there's a lot of ways that could be done in terms of listen to understanding as a two-way street. So is this tie in to our conversation about communicating with instead of communicating to? The two-way street idea? Kind of. And you know, the second part in terms of, I'm not sure this is considered right, but I'm willing to learn I'm wrong, in terms of being vulnerable in conversation, willing to trust each other and be authentic, mostly around the anti-racist work. Okay, super important in terms of growing. Okay. Yeah, keep typing, Jan, keep typing. Because this is really important to get your thoughts here correct. I don't want to guess. I know, no, that's fine. And if you want to do little sentences, if that's easier, you know, because, you know, when I'm not going to, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm really worried about putting words in your mouth. Do you want to try speaking if it's not too loud in the background, or if that's not comfortable? This is an important point.
Yeah, I'm trying to learn whether it's a two-way street in these conversations, or I know there are times when I need to step back and just listen
Mhm.
and not respond and take it in.
Mhm.
And then I don't know what to do with my response, because then it invalidates my response in a way. But I need to know whether I need to learn to live with that and sort that out in a different way, or when is it two-way and when is it not? I guess that's my.
Okay. All right.
Does that
And
make
then-
sense?
I think I'm understanding what you're saying. And this is coming down again to your equity and anti-racist work.
Yeah.
And again, that is, you're talking about a higher level skill in terms of growing and I'm making sure I get this right. So correct me if I'm wrong. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but when you're developing skills around anti-racist work as a white person, it's important to learn, right? When sometimes our culture has not served us well, and we need to unlearn things. But at the same time, the best way to learn often is to contribute to a conversation, right? And so it's you have to talk things out at times in order to learn, and that can be challenging as a white person within these anti-racist conversations, because you don't want to cause more harm, but at the same time you're trying to learn, and you're worried that as you're speaking, that you don't want to cause more harm, but you want to learn and you want to ask questions. Am I capturing that correctly? So Okay, so, and that is something you can definitely, Eileen and her team work on that, how to start having, again, it involves trust, right? That, the difference between intent and impact, right? I'm sure you all have had that conversation. It can be hard where your intent is good, but the impact of what you say is not. And so, but you still, the only way to grow is being able to have those vulnerable conversations. Okay. Did I get it? Okay. So I'm going to write that down because again, that's a really high level skill, having as a group, being able to have those conversations to grow. Okay. All right. So just again, I'm over facilitating, Jan, since you're in a challenging spot. Anything else you want to add before we move on? Okay, great. All right. So growth goals, Bridget, do you have any to add?
Yeah, so I think I'll first start by I'll double down on what Dave was saying about the looking at improving our practices and how we do our work and during those board meetings as one that we continue to work on. And then the other thing that just an observation and thinking about that we are as a board doing our best to follow WASDA practices and WASDA, in terms of evaluation processes and training that we've gotten in terms of that type of thing. And so I'd say, and making sure that our work and our conversations, in addition to centering the student, we also are grounding it in our mission, our vision, our strategic goals, right? And so that would be something that I think would be very helpful, and that when we communicate and then improve communicating out, and how we do that with our different community stakeholders.
Thank you. You just had me typing like crazy. Thank you. All right, and we are going to go around again, right? So this is cumulative, and if you want to add a detail to what someone else said, or another thought popped into your head, let's keep going. These are great. Edna, what do you think? Oh, you're muted.
I'm still thinking.
Okay, excellent. It's a thinking day. It's a thinking day. Anything else you'd like to add, Dave?
Well, the only other one is around the continuing development of this district plan. So where I think we are on that is that Flip's team is working that issue, and so but I think it's going to be important for organizational alignment, and not just the board, but the rest of the organization, to have that pretty well articulated. So I guess ultimately, I think the board will need to review and approve and buy into that. So
Glad you captured that, because that came up in a lot of responses. The board seeing opportunities for growth in all aspects of a district plan. So thank you for capturing that. So I got a little note from Jan in the box to remind me, this helps us remember what we're talking about. Absolutely. It's hard to build on things when we're having so many conversations. So here's what I've tracked so far. So Jan, is there anything else you'd like to, another topic you'd like to add, a detail you'd like to add? More information on what our students need. Oh, okay. So more information. So that's the idea. There was that question? It wasn't 62, but the idea of, how to close, what do you need to do next to work on closing achievement gaps? Like that question pops right to mind when you said that. I'm glad you captured that. That's a good one. Any thoughts, Bridget? Anything else you'd like to add or clarify?
Yeah, so and it's based on some legislation that happened last year. The piece about how school boards are to, definitely do race and equity training and such. The other legislation was Senate Bill 5044, and in terms of looking at educator professional standards.
Mhm.
And there's been several phase process in which that's been identified and is still developing with hopes of it rolling out into the new year. And that framework, looking at that cultural competence and intercultural communication, understanding, individual identities, bias, like those are being looked at as professional competencies. And
Mhm.
I would like us to consider as part of our professional development, actually integrating that as competencies, because then we can even break them down into skills, knowledge, and attitudes
Mhm.
as well. And that is very systemically dominant white-centered language I'm using here in terms of because it's structure, it's becoming part of the structures. It's not it's just as important as lived experiences and as well. But I think that I'm hopeful that it's been updated. It was updated over, I think, 10 or 11 years ago. So there's been a lot of work, and
Mhm.
it's and how it'll play out won't just be with educators. There were superintendents as part of this process. There were principals, there were community members, and even talk of board. So I don't know what WASDA's doing on that front, but I'm thinking that might be coming down the pike too, thinking about like what that framework could look like.
Well, I can help you because I get to be part of that team because I am that lucky. So if you're able to go to Bellevue for annual conference in November, the first module. So I don't know. I know Dave has done some of the onboard finance modules, right? So the very thoughtful and planned out professional development for school board members. The same team is making the equity modules to comply with 5044. And actually above and beyond that, because there's some specific things that are named in the law that school board members need to learn about. But we know that there's such a desire and actually a skill set amongst school board members that there's a whole spectrum that we have to support board members on, right? And so the first step, though, is complying with the law. So the law said there are, diversity, equity, inclusion, cultural competency, right? Like all these things that you mentioned, Bridget, that school board members need to learn about in their first term. And the first step to that, WASA has made an introductory course that will be required. You kind of got to get everyone on the level set. Some people have self-taught, some people have lived experience, like you mentioned, Bridget, some people have no experience at all. You kind of got to get a level set. So at the annual conference, there are breakout sessions for the introductory class for this series. It's been completed. I get to teach one of them. I'm that lucky. So because it's on board and it's very structured, there's materials, people are very consciously placed together in groups of 4 with the exercises. They ask people to pre-register. So if you go on the WASDA website, and I can dig up the link and drop it in the chat for you. They just ask that you reserve a spot so they know how many people. It doesn't cost anything extra. They're just asking for pre-registration. So I can get that for you. But it is in development. There's 2 modules already done, 3 more in the hopper. And so it'll be this would be an easy one for you to be able to do. So any other thoughts? So I want to give you one more chance, and because you've been doing a great job processing. And I don't want to end the conversation in case there's anything else. This is a very rich list. Anything else you'd like to add?
So I guess I'd just like to clarify, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bridget, but under the WASDA practices, you talk about ground, the work, and mission and strategic values. I think there was something fairly specific in there, which we've talked about, and that is our process for evaluating the superintendent. We, I think, agreed to review that process and get it more in line with some of the WASDA processes there. So that's a pretty specific one related to that.
And I have one more thing that I'm not aware if we have any policies or procedures for hearings. I really, given my experience being part of those last couple of years, I really feel that we need that.
What kind of hearings?
Employee hearings.
So there is some human resources law. Sometimes boards get involved with employee hearings. Often they don't because of some stipulations on due process, how due process works with boards. But in terms of hearings, in terms of board setting policy for expectations for employees, like if there's, I'm trying to think what a hearing might be about in terms of employee expectations, rights, student safety.
Maybe Dr. Herndon, you can clarify because we've been part of several.
Yeah, so through the appeals process, so there are a couple of places where that can happen. Sometimes it's the appeals process through the CBA. So
Okay.
there's some things that can
bargain.
work their way up there, and an appeals process sometimes for things like student discipline that can go up there. So what I can do is I can dig out those particular policies and procedures, and then I can send them out to the board to see if that's something that we need to continue to work on. I don't have them off the top of my head right now.
Yeah, so these were a number of appeals that we had that came through relative to our policies. There was a decision made by somebody in the administration on some issue, and they had the right to appeal to the board. And as we were going through some of those, it's not really well defined, how that should be done and what the constraints are. And I actually had a conversation with Abigail Westbrook, the legal person, on some of those issues, and she agreed that it's on her to-do list. I don't know if she'll get to it, but to try to develop some guidelines for boards around how to do those reviews. And so yeah, that would be definitely helpful, because we had a lot of questions about what could we do, what should we do, those kinds of things, and there isn't a lot of guidance on that issue at this point.
Yeah, and I want to make sure that there's clarity, because there are sometimes financial implications to the organization for things. There's legal liability that can happen, and my job is to provide as much clarity as possible. I mean, there's always, people can always appeal if they don't like the decisions, or lawsuits happen because people don't believe that's the right interpretation. What I don't want us to be in the position of is murky language that increases that potential. So, I'd love to get as much clarity so that the board can, if it's not their position or it's something there, I don't want to put them in a position that increases that possibility of, the liability to either themselves or the organization. So.
Thank you. That's what I was trying to summarize without the background, but does that cover your question, Bridget?
Yeah, I think that I feel that as a board, we need more clarity as to what is our role and responsibility. How do we do those with equitably? How do we make sure that we're just doing whatever we can do to be ethical and how we do those?
I think ethically that's a word, right? Ethically.
Sure
okay.
is.
It's like, did you see that Ted Lasso episode where they get weird words stuck in there? Okay. All right. Thank you for that. That is a really important one. Any others? Okay. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. So, And actually the last one just kind of covered this. Like, I think it's important to distinguish work from things you want to learn more about. And we've covered this a couple of times. I want to learn more about, what's the equitable, ethical, and the legal parameters around doing hearings, right? In terms of Jan's point about, okay, how do we have the anti-racist conversations in a way where people can vulnerably and authentically participate, right? That's something perhaps we need to learn about. So part of the goals, we already identified some learning goals as well as action goals, but is there anything else people have a wondering about that would like to get more information or research or just learn? We might have covered it. Okay. And then, yeah, and all these goals, and I think we've covered this properly. Oh, did you have one, Jan? Oh, thank you. Need to learn more about what our staff and students are feeling and experiencing. Oh, I liked, okay. I'm going to capture this. Learn about. All right, sorry, I got to make my little bullet list. So what our staff and students are feeling, and is it maybe around recovering from the pandemic, even though we're still in it, but impacts of the pandemic? Are there any certain areas? Because this could be kind of broad, Jan. What are you thinking?
While she's thinking, oh, okay.
Oh, everything's filtered through admin. Oh, right. Because yeah, sometimes, yeah, well, sometimes a summary, even, right? A summary doesn't give you the full breadth, right? And nuances that you need from direct. Okay. So what's the best way for the board to get this information without being summarized by staff? And you were saying something. I'm sorry to cut you off, Dave.
No, the thought that just came to my mind. We talked about, so in our district, at almost every building, we have they have what's called care teams, which are groups of staff that get together and work on issues for specific students that they may be wrestling with, and it would be really interesting to me to hear what the generic issues that those teams are seeing. It's just an example of how to kind of get that.
That's a good idea. Okay. Anything else? And we have, again, been talking about the roles and responsibilities of the board. I'm glad we've already incorporated that into our conversation. But anything else you want to learn more about? Okay, it might come up. My list isn't going anywhere. And I had to put, just to wrap this up, because we're gonna next, we have a couple minutes left, which is perfect. We're gonna use a protocol that I find helpful, and we're gonna model it with the OPMA question in order to help, because I again, being in a pandemic, providing education, trying to improve service, our service, your service to a diverse community, right? These are large questions sometimes, and it's helpful to have a way of moving forward with them. And so not some boards, and it depends on the question. Sometimes boards don't need a structured way. Sometimes it's best not to have a structured way, but just in case this would be a tool for you, I thought we'd do a little exercise. And so this is going to be called compass points. So what this is actually a way of just organizing ways of processing a question or priorities in order to ensure equitable participation by a group, right? So everyone has a chance to, because either culturally or with different communication styles, sometimes it can be hard to get equitable input from group members. And then it also helps to fully flesh out questions. Sometimes if you don't, you need a way in a complicated topic to make sure you're covering all the aspects of that topic, right? Because again, you want to identify something before you find a solution for it, right? So let's talk about OPMA as a board, because this is such a pain. I have to say, I could go on for hours about how it's so hard for school boards, and yet legislators have all these exemptions, right? But it is really the way it's been interpreted mostly by the courts makes this challenging. So the idea of how the board, a quorum of the board is so easy to trigger, and yet it's incumbent on board members to be out in the community, right? And interacting with people, and even like an email thread could trigger OPMA. It's a challenge. So first, let's talk about, I'm just going to insert a new page break here in case I need to reference my notes here in Word. But so let's talk about OPMA. And first, let's talk about what the challenges have been around it. So, because that might help us again, focus on defining this. So what challenges have you all been having with OPMA? I think I see Jan typing. But feel free, I'm like, you could just, it just come up a couple times, and it's a relatively small scope to use it as an example. Limited number of us who can participate in district professional development and other activities. Okay. So is it in general, like how to find ways for you all to interact outside the boardroom? Is that the
So
scope of it?
Amy, I'll share too.
Okay.
So I think the first time that this came up that I'm aware of was after the murder of George Floyd, and there were community forums happening. So in terms of restorative practices, which is very important work, which is very, and everybody's deserving of that healing and community. And so what ended up happening, I think, at one of those forums, because they were happening every single day. I think it was Wednesday, because I attended Monday and Tuesday, and I didn't see anybody. I think that was it. Dave and Jan also, were part of that group. And so I was told that I had to leave, I think, because Jan and Dave were already on the at the meeting. So that's kind of how it all first, at least that was my experience of OPMA, as I was told that I had to leave a meeting. Okay. And so, and being a community member that's been part of that group, that was extremely traumatizing to be told that I can't be there, I gotta go. And so that was something that was my first experience with OPMA, and how it was interpreted and how it was acted out. And it wasn't just us, it was done in front of community members as well. So anybody who also has been traumatized in such ways got to see that happen to a board member. The only brown board member was told that she didn't belong, she had to go. So that was one experience with OPMA that happened. And then I remember, and I am part of a lot of community groups, and I'm very active because I'm also a parent too for two schools. And so I'm part of groups and things. So most of the time out in the community, it's not a problem. Like, at least for me, it's not, because other folks don't show up to quite a few of the meetings that I'm part of. And what started happening too after the murder of George Floyd, because it didn't happen before, there was no race and equity committees that there ever was too many board members at. But once I think more eyes were opened, it became important, or more important, or we have to do something, right? And And then since then, it seems that like the district race and equity meetings seem to be one of those areas of concern. And then so that's what I'm noticing. It's that, or maybe steering together. So steering together is a restorative practice group that's happening at Showalter, and I'm part of the planning team for that. And so then when other folks want to attend, it's it becomes, in my mind, it's not a problem. I think it's awesome that our district members want to attend the meeting. But depending on how we're looking at OPMA and we're interpreting it through our cultural lenses and the systemically dominant views, that it's problematic. And so I think, so what I'm getting at is, I think that I as a board member, we as a board have culture. We have culture, and it's and part of it is a systemically dominant legislative, and that does not mesh well with other community cultures out there. And because that's how I would describe it. It's like a crash of cultures that I hold both cultures, and to be told that I can't be there, I don't belong, is once again another example. I'm just throwing out another example of what in my leadership, that it's a limited resource. Only 2 of us can be there. Like I'm listening and I'm like, no, that's not true. What I mean by that is if we do public notice, we can absolutely be there. But folks, I feel like I'm saying this to a vacuum. No one has acknowledged that. And then also in terms of the interpretation. So I'm very much up for resistance. I have a lot of resistance capital as a brown person, and that's how I got through this high, K-12 system, because a lot of folks don't make it. The resistance against what isn't, like how to fight for what's right and what our communities need. And so there was the Excel spreadsheet that Jan and Tracy, I can't remember who proposed it, where we're supposed to sign up for meetings and that type of thing. And so, like, once again, that's not taking the culture or the community into consideration of what they need, or who what's out there, what's happening out there. It's something internal. So once again, we're not bringing the community in on that conversation either. And so, like, those are some of the concerns and the challenges, at least in my lenses as a community leader, that I've had to deal with the last couple years. Actually, no, it really is after the murder of George Floyd.
Okay, that's very helpful, Bridget. Thank you. I've taken, so how I summarize this, and then I want to see if anyone else has anything to add to it. So the question to be defined is how to work with OPMA to add flexibility for board members, and then how to create a solution that works with all cultural lenses and backgrounds. That's how I've summarized it. And for the purpose of our exercise, is there anything else that anyone would like to add to this?
I would just add that the culture is white supremacist culture. We haven't named it, so I just want to make sure we're naming it and give honor to that.
So we can absolutely name it, and that's again maybe my word of all instead of each, to that works with each cultural background. Because I think I want to acknowledge that coming up with a very structured approach can come from a white supremacist background, but the goal of what we're trying to find a solution for is find something that works for each and every cultural background. Does that make sense, Bridget? Like, in terms of how to frame it for the endpoint?
Okay.
If hopefully I'm communicating it well.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about our list of things to work on as well. That's slide.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that can be added, that we learn to identify and transform white supremacist culture elements. So that's a lot of the transformative leadership work that the Puget Sound ESD is trying to do with us. So maybe can we add it there, because it really does need to, and maybe wherever you add it, don't add it to the bottom of the list. That looks really bad.
Point well taken. Well, and and also too, the other goal that was identified by Jan, I think really well, how to have these vulnerable conversations in a way that moves the conversation forward, right? And acknowledges, aspects of white supremacist culture, but in a way where people can learn and grow, right? And so, and be vulnerable and because no one wants to impart harm. And so by finding a solution and acknowledging a solution for this OPMA question needs to support each cultural background for everyone that's using it.
Right. And that people learn and grow without utilizing the labor of Black and Brown people. So that's the other piece. So so
I guess I'm not following.
Sure. So like in terms of, so like in our group, I'll just use the example in our board, that if people need to learn and grow, it shouldn't be me that has to be the one that teaches or explains. I do it wonderfully. I do it all the time, but that it's not up to me to fix it, that the truth is I am practicing it. That's what I do. I try to do in my professional development, is to practice the very skills that we're getting training to do. And so that it isn't up to me to be the person that has to break down anything for anyone. That I already, as a brown woman, I already do 3 or 4 times as much labor oftentimes in all different spaces. And so like just so this kind of speaks to the power and privilege again, the power dynamics that exist.
Sure. At the same time, allowing people the space to grow. Right? Like no, it's true. Like I don't think in any sphere that anyone does work in, I don't think people of color need to carry the load of all the work. Absolutely not. But finding a way to do this, and that's why I think this is a great example. And we're gonna are people gonna be okay going over? Because we're gonna go over. Maybe what I'll do. Okay, yeah, see Jansen in a Starbucks. Okay, so we're going to do our best to move through this maybe and dive into it and maybe try to weave this in as we do it. But so, how to work with OPMA to add flexibility for each board member and doing it in a way that acknowledges and supports cultural needs of people, right? Finding a solution basically that works for everyone, right? So, how this protocol works is, first of all, you try to talk about the upside, right? So on the compass point, the E, so this is just a little mnemonic device using a compass for this. The E stands for excited. So if you want to talk about what makes us excited about solving this OPMA question, I'll throw out an example. So the upside would be, obviously, there's more ability for the board to interact in staff events as well as community events. Any other examples of upside people would like to say? It might be, I chose a simple one on purpose. There might not be we don't need to overthink this.
Well, I know that the community would be appreciative and feel like who they are and what they're doing is important.
Right. Okay. Any other upside for people, or is it pretty straightforward? Try to be mindful.
I think, from the board, getting the information from these various groups is a huge upside.
Absolutely, right? Because to an earlier point from Jan, how do you find ways of getting all the nuanced information, not just a summary that staff typed up, right? Being able to be in community with people is one of the best ways to do that. Good point, Dave. Any other upside?
Well, and the interactions also help establish, the trust. I mean, it's hard to trust somebody if you don't really interact with them. So.
Okay, absolutely. So now another part of the mnemonic device is W for worrisome. So what's the downside of going through the process of trying to find a way of working with OPMA to add more flexibility for board members? So any downsides we can think of? Again, simple.
I just think it would be beneficial for all involved.
Right. Well, maybe a downside, finding a solution that's complicated. Lawsuits, okay. Right? Like if it's not a legally compliant solution, right? I have to say, there are unfortunately community people who look for excuses to file actions against school boards, unfortunately. So lawsuits is a potential downside, it's true.
Another worry is that our students, our families, our communities just see us as an extension of the law, right? That if we, rather than creating ways that we can show up out in the community, that we're utilizing it as a barrier. So that would be another thing, or that we are accepting it just because it's law. That'd be a worry of mine.
Okay.
Like using the structures and power to reinforce the structures and power is what I'm speaking on.
Okay. Any other worries? Okay. Oops, I went. So need to know. So what do we need to know? Is there anything do we need to, for example, do we need to find out details about OPMA? Do we feel we're comfortable understanding it? Are there anything we feel like we need to know? The consequences of breaking OPMA. Anything else we need to know?
Yeah, having been frustrated and trying to work with this for years, there's nuances as to when you get down into the words, okay, does this particular situation come within OPMA or does it not? As an example, the other day I heard Abigail talk about, the OPMA doesn't directly apply to WASDA, like the WASDA annual conference, because school directors are there doing WASDA business and not school district business. That was a nuance that I'd never heard before. And so, yeah, it's a horribly nuanced law.
Well, and I have to say, actually, that one surprises me. Most boards I know publish annual conference as an annual meeting, just to get a little coverage from OPMA in case you're sitting off at the side and you end up talking about how something impacts you. That actually kind of surprised. In fact, I remember once Mercer Island residents showing up at annual conference, right? Because they had to watch their board members. But that surprises me from Abigail.
Another need is for us to have to share power. So we need to share power by going, if we want to share power with each other and the community group, we need to be willing to talk with them to see if it's okay, hey, that we really care about this topic. We want to be there. Can we, and do a public notice, because what goes along with the public notice, I do believe, because I've really scrubbed that law down, is also, I think access to an agenda. Isn't that correct as well?
Although agenda can be a one line, but what it does publicize an event.
Yes.
So there might be events. For example, I'll give a pretty innocuous example, and I'm sorry, this is 12:03. I want to acknowledge that. I'm going to try to move this along, but meetings with legislators, very rarely do you use a quorum of the board, because you don't want the public necessarily showing up to conversations with legislators, because then they shut down and you can't lobby them in the same, right? So there's there's some pretty simple logistical ways.
So I guess to simplify it, share power, because we're trying as a group to figure out how to do this on our own. And I think that if we share our power and collaborate with these community groups, I think together we could come up with a solution, right? And so I think that's another thing, is to share power and a need to look for win-win situations.
Well, and that actually tags on to Jan's comments in the chat about how would it affect groups to have more board meetings attending, right? Does it, how can it be structured to create that win-win?
The only thing also that I would just briefly add to this, the need to know is some communication amongst board members to know if people are going to be going to those events. So there are some events that are important that all board members are going to want to go to, which is great. But there are so many events you wouldn't even know, like all those groups wouldn't necessarily know to have to do a public posting. So you wouldn't want kind of the impromptu, the example previously of folks just kind of showing up and then all of a sudden being in that situation where we didn't know, we were all going to be here. So now we're in this position because the meeting wasn't posted ahead of time. There's just so it's just some communication that I think could be worked out as well.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Flip. And I grabbed that. Jan just sent me a note. She's going to get picked up here in a sec, but I'm going to try to wrap this up. But we may lose Jan in a minute. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. So thank you. And, I'm going to build off of what you said, Flip. I think maybe an understanding of who has to do the work per OPMA. Again, if legal compliance is one of the need to knows, who posts the meeting, who sets the agenda, who writes the minutes, right? Because then that can help formulate how a solution comes about. So who has to, I'm going to put that down as who has to do the work of posting agenda minutes under OPMA, right? Because that will impact the question about structuring it with the community, right? In terms of the impact on the community. Is this within the board that has to do that work, the posting, the minutes, the agenda? How does that impact besides the fact you're publicizing a meeting, perhaps out in the community? Any other need to knows? Okay, and then the final one is what suggestions in terms of moving forward and looking for a solution to this? What suggestions do you think, some of this wasn't kind of woven into the need to know, in terms of making sure we think about how we're sharing power within the board actually, and also with the greater community, right? I think that might either be in the need to know or a suggestion, but any other suggestions on how to best move forward to find a good answer to this?
Well, for the two specific meetings where this has happened,
Mhm.
if more than two people want to attend, then maybe, or even being rather than reactive, be preventative and have maybe talk with those two groups and see what their thoughts are. Who, would they want more than two? Who would they want? What are their needs? Because we've only been talking about our needs today. So I once again, this is kind of that framework, right? Like how we're thinking about things, to really
Absolutely.
see what is in their best interest too, right?
Right. Yeah, and incorporating that into how you approach it going forward. That's a good idea. Love that. What other suggestions for moving forward?
Yeah, I think I just agree with Bridget. I identify the meetings where this might be an issue and then see if we can work with them and notice it and however that works out.
Great. Any other thoughts?
I have one more, but I'll create space if someone else has something.
Thank you for that, Bridget. But I think, yeah, go in the interest of time, go ahead and share your thought.
Okay, so then there's also community meetings in which it's very much like lecture style. So like I'll give the example, like with different like the King County Library System, or an event happens and we log in and we're attendees, but we don't have any interaction, and we don't even necessarily will know if other people are logged in. And it's not just school district meetings, even out in the community, there's
Right.
there's city council meetings, there's different things like that. And so I think that also when considering or being prepared to defend ourselves against OPMA is, if we're in the audience and we don't have any interaction or even know who the other people are that might be calling in or whatnot, then how in the world is that? Because we've been talking very insularly about the school district, but there's so much there's tons of stuff that happens out in the community, and it's never been a problem before, but I just bring it up now because, like I said, I've never seen it. I think there's been a couple where Jan and I are at the meeting, but that's not a problem, right? So it's just in case something like that happens, it's not just our district.
For sure. And actually that builds off well, a point Dave had under the N about need to know, understanding the nuances, which situation fits OPMA, right? And so let me add your detail to it, in terms of what if board members aren't interacting? Because again, I've heard of board members, like if they bump into each other at a high school football game, they'll just split up, right? Just in case, right? If you're not sitting next to each other and having a conversation, right? And it could be, right, understanding those nuances could be really helpful. So in terms of this S, the suggestion for moving forward, thinking about how the solution could kind of look like, what would be helpful? So is it, explaining some scenarios after the research is done, pulling all the research together? In terms of helping to move forward, what would a helpful solution look like? If maybe we don't know it till we see it, but any elements there that we should capture? We might have already captured it,
I guess the only other aspect of this is, I think was mentioned before, and that is if we come up against something that's difficult, then one thing would be to start advocating with the legislature for some changes to the law.
Mm-hmm.
If we come up against some roadblocks or something, that I know that's a heavy lift, but we can certainly do that.
All right. Well, and I think maybe when we define the problem, there's an element, making sure the solution, right, doesn't come just from the white supremacist culture framework, right? Making sure it comes with applies many cultural lenses to it. I think that would be an important aspect of how the solution should look, right? Okay. All right. So obviously we are over time, so I'm going to stop it there. But what I'm going to do is take this conversation and forward it to you. So now you have something to work with. Part of this, in terms of the needs, the information needs around it, this is something Flip can help you with, contacting WASDA, absolutely helpful. There's a WASDA publication on OPMA, actually, if you haven't already found it, right? So I can always help you find resources as well, but hopefully this will give you some steps and things to think about as you come up with a solution that works for your board. And then it kind of gives you practice. If you have more complicated topics to talk about, you could spend many hours, obviously, breaking out these 4 elements that help you formulate a solution. Okay, so that's our last slide. So the output of this is for me today, just so you have expectations. I'm going to sum up this compass points exercise to help you with your OPMA question. I'm going to sum up the goals that we typed up and get that to you as well. Is there anything? I think you all have done a lot of heavy lifting today, right? This is really important work. Again, this is not a switch to be flipped, right? Having vulnerable conversations with each other is really important to be able to grow. But is there anything else I love working with you all. Is there anything else you'd want to add before we close up here?
I just want to say thank you for your time, and thank you, Dr. Herndon, for all your behind the scenes preparation and everything, and thanks to each other today.
More than welcome on my behalf. All right.
All right. So this has been lovely. So thank you for your time. I'll get those notes to you, and then keep doing the great work, I guess. I guess it's just time to say goodbye.
Yeah.
So thank you, everyone.
I need someone to make an official motion to end the meeting and then second and adjourn.
I so move that we would adjourn the meeting.
Second.
Okay.
Great. I will make sure we put this recording into the cloud, and 12:14.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.